This is the Ka-50 Black Shark, and today I'm going to be taking a look at it on the War Thunder development server. Once added to the live server upon the release of War Thunder Update 1.93, this is going to be the Tier 6 premium helicopter on the Russian helicopter line. This line also happens to be getting a new top helicopter this update in the form of the Tier 7 Mi-28N Havoc. Now the Ka-50 will certainly be one of the strongest helicopters in game upon release, thanks in most part to its Vikir ATGMs. These have a range of 10 kilometers and can actually lock onto enemy ground vehicles or slower flying enemy aircraft. When attacking ground units, it acts like a standard ATGM and has up to 1000mm of best effective pen, making it more than up to the task of destroying most enemy ground units. But when attacking enemy air units, the Vikir will employ a proximity fuse, meaning that in many cases you will not even need to get a direct hit to take down an enemy air unit. I can see this being a big problem, especially in helicopter battles, where you can be well out of enemy range and will simply need to get the missile close enough to trigger the fuse. I can certainly expect this to be very broken in helicopter EC especially, but we are just going to have to wait until the live release to see just how it pans out. Other weapons on this vehicle range from the S-8KO rockets, of which we can see on most other Russian helicopters, the Igla air-to-air missiles, which are also featured on the Mi-35 and the Mi-28, dual 23mm gun pods, and finally Fab 250 and Fab 500 bombs. And of course, all of those can be arranged in a large variety of different payloads to suit various different mission aims. Although personally I prefer the payload with 40 S-8KOs, 6 Vikirs and 2 Igla air-to-air missiles. This is the payload that I will be using in the gameplay later in this video. A final weapon worth mentioning is the 30mm cannon. This is mounted on the side of the fuselage and holds 460 rounds of ammunition with a rate of fire of 546 rounds per minute. It has the capability to use either default ground target or air target belts with up to 100mm of pen on the ground target belts. This will certainly come in handy against lightly armoured ground targets. The Ka-50 does have night vision but lacks a thermal sight, so it is a bit more difficult to see enemy vehicles at longer ranges, although thankfully the standard sight it has does have a decent amount of zoom, so it helps to offset that issue a bit. The other features include flares and a radar warning receiver system, both of which will come in handy when countering various enemy attacks. Currently, the Ka-50 does not feature a fully detailed cockpit, but it does still get a nice selection of skins, a stock camouflage, the black scheme for 200 golden eagles, and then of course the pre-order bonus black shark scheme. So now getting into a test flight just so I can demonstrate a few things before we get into some gameplay. In this test flight I'm taking 12 Vikirs and the 2 23mm gun pods. Firstly, of course, the gear goes up and it has an animation for this. Moving on from that, we're going to look at the 23mm gun pods real quick, going in on the M163 anti-aircraft vehicle. As you can see, from the top, it didn't stand a chance. The 23s are relatively powerful, and against lightly armoured vehicles and other helicopters, they will prove to be quite useful if you decide to use them. Using the lock system to lock onto this M1 Abrams, fire the missile, and yeah, there we go. Hits the upper part of the chassis side and just blows them up. 1000mm pen, it will be quite useful. Occasionally, it will take more than one ATGM, but in most cases, you won't need more than one to kill an enemy vehicle. Now testing out the proximity fuse, F-86A Sabre, lock onto him, fire the missile, doesn't even hit him, just gets close enough to set the fuse off, and it blows his wing off, and that is him down. So, as you can see, that proximity fuse is going to be relatively useful against slower flying air targets. In terms of agility, the Ka-50 is certainly better than your average Russian helicopter, being able to perform loops and rolls relatively easily, something of which will come in handy when in close combat with other helicopters that may be more agile, such as the Eurocopter Tiger, the AH-1 series, all those kind of things. That slightly better agility will come in handy. Of course, having a wheeled undercarriage will mean that if you so desire, you can land this horizontally rather than just hovering and then going down slowly, of course just touching down and then using the brakes to stop the helicopter. This is actually a tactic that I do use fairly often, as it tends to be a quicker method of stopping than going into a hover and then landing vertically. So now getting into some gameplay, ground RB of course. Now, when flying the Ka-50 on the dev server, one thing I noticed was that the main threat to you was other Ka-50s. This thing is very deadly, and the Vikirs are absolutely devastating against other air targets. So my main priority was obviously to take out enemy helicopters. Got the first one, he was moving relatively slowly, so I could literally just lock onto him and feel relatively confident that the missile would take it out, which, you know, it did. Then moving along a bit more, I see another Ka-50 at lower level, and you know, he's flying along, he's got his gear down, doesn't really know what he's doing by the looks of it, and then he begins to turn towards me. I fire a missile, and since he's moving relatively fast, I don't lock him, I just manually guide it, and you know, missile straight to the face, that's him dead. Luckily, he was down before he could fire anything at me, drop some flares, and then drop my altitude to prevent being seen. After that, I begin to move a bit more towards the actual tank battleground, and I see another Ka-50. This guy literally just flying above the battlefield, so I do lock onto him, but then I notice that, you know, it's locking more to the top of his helicopter rather than the actual fuselage, so I then manually guide it, clip the back of his heli, that's another one down, and while looking around, I spot the one enemy who is actually in a tank, little guy in a bagel panzer, so I fire a missile off, and you know, he has basically no armor, hit to the back, that is him down. So that relatively well demonstrates the Vikirs against air targets and of course ground targets, but one other thing that you have access to, and especially on this loadout I have equipped now, is the Igla air-to-air missiles. We've also seen these on the Mi-35, and luckily I get an opportunity to use them against this little G91. Lock up, fire the missile, and he was relatively close, really had no chance of dodging it. Went in, knocked him out. This thing has an 18G overload, travels at 1,000 meters per second. It's a relatively decent air-to-air missile. Of course, then I do go and destroy some bots using the S8KO rockets. At this point, all the actual players were dead, so it was just a bunch of bots from a much lower BR than this thing is from, so it was relatively easy fodder for the unguided rockets. I then move in, land at the A point, capture that point, and my team actually did almost lose this game. The enemy bots captured a bunch of stuff, and luckily we did capture it back. I captured the A point by landing, and that was a good game. 4 air targets, a base cap, 1 actual player, and a few bots taken down on the ground. So this was actually my first game in the Ka-50, and from a certain perspective it did go relatively well. I took out 3 enemy air targets before dying. You're probably wondering how I died. No, I was not shot down. I did in fact crash into a bunch of trees, and my helicopter exploded. But that aside, our first target is an Mi-35, and of course 10km range on these things. Yeah, you can knock out these guys literally at their helicopter spawn. And another thing worth noting is that helicopters do now spawn initially at the airfield. There's now also a helipad at the airfield and one closer to the battlefield, but you have to spawn at the airfield, so they actually spawn further away now. Of course, that's not an issue for the 10km range ATGMs on the Ka-50. Second target, Ka-50, I believe I slightly miss him, but the proximity fuse still finishes him up. That is my second kill, and then the third kill is a Ka-50 who is significantly higher. The first Ka-50 I killed, he was low, he was trying to stay hidden from missiles. This guy doesn't care, he's at high altitude, he just flew in there, begins to dive, but at that point it's too late. And then, of course, I crash my helicopter like an absolute pro. Bit of a goof from me there, I will admit. I think it's just a case of it being relatively late at night when I filmed that game, and I was not keeping an eye on my vertical speed indicator. It was a bit too late when I noticed that, I was going down very quickly and I'm going to hit the ground, which of course I did, and I then died. Nonetheless though, this helicopter is good. Maybe a little bit too good in fact. The fact that you can kill enemy helicopters as they are leaving their spawns is, you know, maybe a bit broken, just a little bit, and you don't even need to get a direct hit. You can literally just aim at the enemy helicopter, keep your aim on it, and it will likely be close enough to kill them. What I found worked quite well is use the lock system to get the ATGM as close as possible, and then, of course, if an enemy helicopter is moving relatively quickly, the ATGM tends to lag behind a little bit, and it might be too far away for the proxy fuse. So what I do is I just turn off the lock system when it gets relatively close, manually guide it to make sure I at least get a direct hit, or I just get close enough for that proxy fuse to do a lot of damage. This thing, though, is going to be broken in heli battles. I'm fairly certain of that. As I said earlier, we will need to wait until the live release and see just quite how it pans out, but I wouldn't be surprised if this completely destroys the current state of heli battles. Even though it basically is already broken, it's going to get a whole lot worse. And of course, if someone was to ask me which premium helicopter has the most value for its cost, it would of course be this. It is stupidly powerful, and it is definitely, in my opinion, worth every single penny of its current price. It will completely destroy helicopter EC even more than it already is. You can lock a target from miles away and just rely on the proximity fuse to kill them, which in most cases it certainly will. You are also a relatively fast helicopter, and when you run out of the Kiz, you also have the Igla air-to-air missiles if you choose to take them, and also a fairly decent 30mm cannon to back up those ATGMs when you run out. So in EC, it's going to be an absolute beast and will likely destroy that mode even more if they don't make any more changes to that mode this update, which I'm really hoping they do actually improve Heli EC this update by, maybe actually adding a matchmaker so helis with no defenses against air-to-air missiles do not face helicopters like this. Getting over into ground battles though, it's also pretty broken in there. You can stay well out of SAM range in most cases and still just destroy enemy vehicles on the ground. You can also kill enemy helis out of their spawn. Basically at the start of the game, spawn in, go a bit closer to their spawn, you can just kill a bunch of them. And also slow enemy aircraft are easy targets, and then for faster targets, you can use the Iglas. So this thing is, it's broken in both game modes it can be played in. Personally, I did pre-order this helicopter before I even knew it had the lock-on system and the proximity fuse, so those two are really just cherries on top for me. And of course, post-update, this will be one of my first reviews. I'll be looking at it in both Heli EC and ground battles, and keep an eye out for that, because I will want to be giving it a second look, and I feel like the consensus from me will be the same. It is definitely worth the cost, but it is insanely broken and will likely piss a lot of people off. Anyway though, that's it from me for now. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please consider dropping a like, maybe even subscribe to the channel. If you do, that would be very much appreciated, and I will of course have a few more dev server videos coming out soon on the Mi-28N and the A129 Mangusta International. Anyway, thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.